Hey guys, so we are back again for another thought for the day on prayer. And so today I want to deal with a conversation I think no one talks about, no one deals with. It's something that is real, and I think we as believers need to address it, and that is conversation fatigue. I believe there are times and moments where we can be having robust conversations with God. We can be going before God and saying these things before God. And we get weary, right? Like if you consider conversation with regular folk, with the people who you are having regular relationships with, your boyfriend, your mom, your dad, your sister, your brother, your friend, your coworker, anyone that you're talking to, there are moments where you're probably like, I don't want to talk to them no more. I don't really have anything else to say. I don't have anything else to ask. There's nothing else to give. And I think that that's real with God, right? Like there are moments where we can sit and we can feel like I don't got nothing else to give. I'm tapped, right? And you may, and maybe there's that one that's out there that's like, I don't feel like that. Bless your heart, sanctified, holy. But there are times for the rest of us humans, regular folk on this earth, where we get weary. And we know that it's true because Galatians 6:9 tells us, and let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. So it's important to hold that up because it's clear that it's expressed. You can become weary in this. You can become tired in this. But don't become tired, right? Don't become tired in doing good. And prayer is good. Prayer is a good thing unto God. It is a good thing for us, for our souls, for our spirits. And in that, the not becoming weary in this prayer is held in the latter part. It says, for in due season we shall reap. So sometimes we've got to consider, are we reaping? Did we get something? Is there something to show of a movement forward, right? And I want to draw that up and draw that out because I think we forget that portion, that moment when we are having conversation. In Genesis 1:31 says this: then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So after God had done all of these things, he had spoke these things into existence, right? So conversation is about speaking. So God is speaking these things. He's saying, let there be light, let there be this, let there be the universe, let there be fruit, land, trees, let there be man. He takes a moment, he looks back and he says, you did that, right? He brushes his shoulders off, right? How many times have you been doing something or you've been creating something and you have to brush your shoulders off and be like, you did that. She did that. We got to do that in conversation with God, and not so much about us, but about God. Because when we do that in conversation, it allows for the weariness of what we have to be lifted. I want to use, for example, for Christmas, I had made a blanket, and the blanket was a king size blanket or a queen size blanket, and it had taken me a very long time to do it. I was working on it while I was at work. I was working on it while I was on the train, wherever I was at, in church, doing prayer meeting, late at night, while I was getting my hair braided. I was working on this blanket because I wanted to see something come about. And I remember when it was done, I was so weary. I came into my mother's house and I started crying because I was just tired and I was weary. But I looked at what I did and it took something off of me. It was like, wow. And I think sometimes we don't take a moment to sit and pause and reflect on the things that we've prayed about, that we've seen God do in our prayer, so that we can feel the lift of what God is done. And so I would suggest two things if you are feeling conversation fatigue. The first is to practice adoration. Don't go into your conversation asking for anything. Just go into your conversation really, truly spending moments honoring and saying and declaring who God is. So God, you are my sustainer. You are my provider. You are my lifter. You are the water when I'm thirsty. God, you have been a provider. You are the author and the finisher of my faith, right? Declaring those things out. But as you declare them out, be clear, is this really what I believe? Do I believe that God is the author and finisher of my faith? And allow for those things to saturate into your heart. So that's one thing, because I think adoration puts us into a mind frame, puts us into a place, a proper perspective about the things that are happening. But sometimes it is to just take a list and to just write how you've seen God's hand move in your life. And if you've got to go back to the first point of life, right, to the moment, like maybe there was an umbilical cord wrapped around your throat while you were still in the womb, and you are here today, right? Like that's something you need to put on your list, right? Because that is the reap after the harvest. And it may not have been your prayer, but it might have been your mother's or your father's. And maybe you have been praying that God would give you an increase on your job. It may not be the level of increase that you wanted, but you got to see a shift. Maybe you've been praying that God would provide food for your home, and somebody knocked on your door and gave you a gift card or gave you some food. Whatever it is, I think we really need to begin to take stock of the harvest, and hold firm to what that is. Because sometimes when we are not seeing what we think we see, we are seeing God move. And be selfish in that, right? Like be selfish in whatever it is, whatever that moment it is that you've prayed about, that you've asked God to move. How did you see God move, right? And sometimes the moving is not always how we think it should be, but we do need to begin to take stock of the harvest. And I think when we begin to take stock of what we're reaping from whatever we've sown in prayer, that it will change. I remember thinking I prayed and fasted for some things in my life, and I've seen the beauty of those things manifest and take hold. And so we've got to simply, in our conversation fatigue, take a moment, step back, look at the things that we've said, look at the things that God has said, and see how or what he's done. And I think we, again, look for the big things that we are praying for, but simply the small things, right? The fact that you are able to get up, you have a mind that can think, you have some hands and some feet that can do, that means that God is still moving with you and still giving you ability, right? And we got to give thanks for that. The fact that you got Wi-Fi in your house, you got to give thanks for that. There are people that don't have these things. And sometimes we got to take stock of where God has brought us from. I remember last night I sat down to eat, and I went to eat and I didn't pray. And I stopped myself and I bowed my head and I thanked God. And I didn't thank God for the food that I had on my plate, because I had barbecue chicken, mashed potatoes, and sweet peas. I thanked God for where he had brought me from. I thank God for the fact that I remember when there were nights where tuna fish and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches were my portion. And that's what I was eating because that's what I could afford. But I thank God for the movement. We have got to begin to not think sometimes for where we're at, but where he's brought us from, right? Because that is the reaping of the harvest of the prayers. So do that today. And I pray that whatever fatigue that you may have in this season, that God would lift it, as you see that he is working for you and that he is present for you. And his angels are still taking charge over you, and he is still moving and doing things for you that you could not ever think or imagine.